As a sheltered child, growing up in a rural part of my home state, I was exposed to very little media that was culturally important. I've seen few films mainstream, I've only played a handful of constantly referenced games, and I've seen few anime that continue to be prevalent in weeb culture. So, something I've started doing and taking joy in is going back to those important milestone works with a nostalgia-free perspective, and taking in everything they have to offer as an adult who's at least a little conscious of what they're consuming. And one of those works that topped my list of things to experience was Key's seminal canon from 1999. Even before I really knew what an anime was, I was used to seeing references to its two adaptations in the form of forum signatures and avatars, offhanded jokes about characters and the art, and the odd nod to the visual novel that began it all. Of course, being probably 8 or 9 at the time I had seen those things, I'd only just begun my descent into Japanese media and couldn't really watch or play anything that wasn't readily available to me on YouTube or the one or two abandonware websites that I knew. But I never forgot about canon in all that time, and as I started getting more into the genre of visual novels recently, I was excited to read it. With a perspective untainted by prior viewings of the show, and with little exposure to games in a genre more advanced than it. The latter is an important thing to note, as canon and a few other notable titles by Spike Chunsoft, Leaf, and the Proto-Key company Tactics constitute some of the earliest examples of visual novels as we know them today. Choice-based stories where you click through text without much other interaction to speak of, a stark contrast to titles that came before which resembled their adventure and simulation predecessors, sometimes to great effect and sometimes unnecessarily. There is a video to be made on all of these early VNs, and trust me when I say I plan to get to Moon in 1 eventually, as well as Kizuato if it ever gets a translation or I become capable of reading it, because it's kind of the first Chunige, so you have it to thank for the Fate series. But today I just want to talk about canon because I feel that it's become lost in VN communities by this point despite Key's general cultural cachet and the playability of the game compared to many other older titles. And that's a shame because it's a fascinating game for a lot of reasons. It has a lot to say about a lot of deep topics, it has complex and interesting characters, it has a legacy that reaches far beyond that of later Bishoujo games and Key works, and even within its own circles, it is a profoundly important work, one that still leaves the reader with an emotional impact and a lot to think about during and after its 25-hour duration. But it's also very flawed. You can feel how early it is with its struggles to juggle and pace multiple long paths, a protagonist who's often too flawed, roots that struggle and stick out thematically, shoehorned romances, and I think all these things are worth talking about, because despite its age, these are still not uncommon problems, and despite the many that have come after it, canon is still important. Set in early 1999, our story follows the life of Yuichi Aizawa, a 17-year-old who, for unexplained family reasons, transfers into the school of and moves in with his childhood best friend Dayuki, living with her mom Akiko, two people he knew well from yearly visits. At least, they were yearly visits until something happened 7 years ago. Whatever it was, it caused him to forget almost everything that happened that year and many before at that town, both the good and the bad, leading to a bit of a shock when he comes back and can't seem to recall a lot of what people expect him to. Be it little moments, people, promises, these memories are all dust in the wind that he has to slowly come to recall as he interacts with people from his past, and learn to move on from as he forms new ones, guided by friends new and old. Of course, being a Bishoujo game, most of those friends are girls, many of which you meet fairly early on and each with their own troubles and desires in life. The kind Nayuki, the sweet but sickly Shiori, the bashful Makoto, the cool and quiet Mai, and the eccentric Ayu. Unlike many previous Bishoujo games, however, canon isn't a dating sim in the sense that simulation elements are present here. There's no stat progression, time management, time-based events, or much in the way of challenge. Instead, progression is made entirely through choices, a lot of which just changes what scene you're going to be viewing without any overall effect on the route. What determines which you're going to be playing through are a select few. What surprised me the most about this is just how modern it all feels. Going in, I was expecting some jank with convoluted and vague route requirements, but if you've played any VN since its release, then you'll feel right at home here. This is partly helped by the fact that there's only one or two actual bad endings, which are both easy to avoid. Most wrong choices just fade the screen to black and let you reload to try again. It's very low stakes overall, and I can appreciate that as much as I enjoy the plentiful bad endings with plot like those of Fate Stay Night. Also, unlike some other visual novels, each route is incredibly self-contained with little character development that occurs outside of their assigned path, though I still recommend using a guide as thematic elements and aspects of Canon's world are expanded upon in a very gradual way by following the intended route order, and there is plenty of the former, though not so much of the latter. This is still modern-day Japan after all, so Canon's focus is placed far more on building its characters and themes through little moments and events in each route. And even in this early work, Key's staff knew how to make characters that people can fall in love with, not just for being cute moe blobs, but for being complex characters that are relatable and kind as they are tragic and interesting. There is a very, very careful balance of joy and sorrow that extends to the general mood. The 24 days of story takes place across ebb and flow between fun and happy slice of life and dealing with depressing realities in a way that never feels like it's dwelling on sadness nor impossible optimism, using both extremes and everything in between to show how each person reacts to different things in life and build character. And it works well. Almost everybody here is lovable once properly introduced, and despite the trotting pace and the downtime of some routes, I was always invested in the cast. Admittedly, I might have been more tolerant of the moe quirks of the characters than others, as they're an oft-criticized element now, but if you can tolerate them, then you'll quickly find they only make up a small portion of why everyone is so memorable. Character traits and quirks are shown subtly through relatable situations and believable dialogue, so subtly in fact that it took me until I was writing the script to realize I can't exactly point to some particular moments that made characters click with me. They just sorta did over time, even the minor ones. Naoki's mom, Akiko, is probably my favorite side character just because of how much of a kind and unaffected person she seems to be on the surface, but the more you read, the more you realize she's very much attuned to everyone and everything around her and just wants to take care of people. Yuichi's classmates are also wonderful. Anytime Sayuri or Kaori showed up during a slice of life scene, I was all for it. I love the gentle humor that the former brings with her, and how Kaori is one of the few people that can match Yuichi's generally tired demeanor in an even and fun way, but those two as well as the rest of the side cast still get to be fully fleshed out people. That's to say nothing of the 5 main heroines themselves. Naoki is the kind of eternally sleepy and easily amused girl I can absolutely sympathize with. Makoto's childish antics are always a blast. Maya is one of the most endearing quiet girls out there. Shiori is precious and deserves absolutely no blasphemy. And Ayu worked her way up as one of my favorite characters in any piece of media for reasons I'll dive into soon. About the only character who I had mixed feelings on is Yuichi, who is... well, he's kind of a mess. He'll go out of his way to help people out and be a decent person for a lot of his actions, but he's also a smug jackass with barely any verbal restraint who doesn't seem to care how what he does makes someone feel if he feels justified in it, be that for apathy towards himself or otherwise. It's a pretty low place for the audience's perspective of events to start, and while I'm all for characters that start off awful and grow as the story moves on, I don't think Key quite had a grasp on that here. Like, there's having someone start out as a pessimistic dick with an exhausted heart of gold, and then there's just shoving a girl's bag of food into the snow and letting people off with as much care as a bull in a china shop. Key has acknowledged him since then, even making fun of him as recently as in this winter anime season with a parody of their own games, but it's still a pretty exhausting example of the jerk to nice guy trope at times, and sadly not something that was uncommon for VNs at the time. If you can stick through this though, and I really think it's worth it, then there is a lot to see here. Canon is the second game to be developed as a Nakige, or crying game, one that attempts to endear you on its characters while putting them through emotional situations, and typically ending with a happy ending, or at least one that's not entirely terrible, as a way to leave an emotional impact on the reader. The major theme of Canon, as I see it, is grief. The pain of losing friends and family, of things coming to an end, the regrets we carry with us from our past, and how we choose to cope with all of it. What do we do when someone we love is going to pass away? How do we hide our pain and our scars, and should we even hide them? Should we just forget about everything that's hurt us, and what happens when we do? The root and character that explores many of those questions most blatantly is Shiori Misaka. Yuichi meets her early on in the game, just relaxing in the school courtyard by herself. She initially comes off as a shy, quirky girl, carrying around tons of seemingly useless stuff with her, laying about by herself, being a loner between classes, waxing poetic foreshadowing, and being just a bit sickly. A short time after meeting her, however, things start to seem off. Her supposed sister in the same class as Yuichi, Kaori, flatly denies even having a sister after Yuichi asks, no matter how many times he does, and what Shiori claims is a normal cold seems to be getting worse with no signs of stopping. This all comes to a head when Kaori asks to meet with Yuichi late one night and explains everything. They are in fact family, but as much as Shiori wants to be acknowledged and loved by her sister, Kaori wants nothing to do with her because she doesn't have long left to live. An unknown incurable disease is going to lead to her passing away soon, and in Kaori's mind, it's simply easier to pretend she doesn't exist than to try and form a bond. Because forming one means confronting the pain that comes from losing someone close to you, someone who's going to be taken away from the world far sooner than is right. It's just easier to pretend she doesn't exist than it is to acknowledge her as a person, as family, that's going to fade away right before her eyes. That pain is made even worse by Shiori's desire to simply be treated like a normal person before her time is up, something that's not easy for anyone to do. But Yuichi tries his best. He goes out with her on dates, he spends time with her around friends, and with just the two of them, slowly becoming a couple, until her time is up to be hospitalized and for her to wait the end of her life. Of course, being a world where miracles exist, Shiori is seemingly cured of what ailed her, and so she's able to keep living a happy life, ending her route on one final note, one that we're gonna come back to later.
例えば今、自分が誰かの夢の中にいるって考えたことないですか？
なんだそれ。
ですから例え話ですよ。夢を見ている誰かは夢の中で一つだけ願いを叶えることができるんです。夢の世界で暮らし始めた頃はただ泣いていることしかできなかった。でもずっと夢の中で待つことをやめなかった。そして小さなきっかけがあった。願い事は長い時間を待ち続けたその子に与えられたプレゼントみたいなものなんです。だからどんな願いでも叶えることができた。
The thing that sticks with me the most is the way this route explores the worth of memory and kindness when weighed against suffering, and how miracles tie into this. Canon's form of good old key magic, something you'd see in basically all their visual novels, is the existence of supernatural phenomena. Spirits, magical powers, and miracles are all present here in very, very light quantities, and while all of them are thematically relevant, miracles are the most important of the three. This is particularly true here as they're both the only reason Shiori survives, and they're pivotal to the themes of this route working, because on some level, Kaori seems to be aware of the fact that miracles are real in Key's version of Japan, that there's a slim chance of survival for someone like her, and yet she chooses to be realistic and pessimistic to justify her cold and distant behavior, going as far as to call Shiori that girl and deny her existence. And that's wrong, right? That's not the right thing to do. At least that's what I think, and that's what Key's writers seem to think, but can you really blame her? Knowing how painful loss and grief is, knowing how much they both hurt, it makes sense someone would want to try and avoid it because it feels better for them in the short term. It feels better that they don't have to worry about confronting it if they just don't make a bond. It makes an interesting dichotomy of Yuichi, who while sharing the same core belief as Kaori that her death is soon inevitable, chooses to take it as a reason to form a bond, because even if it hurts, she deserves a happy ending to her story. She deserves a loving partner, a normal life filled with mundane and fun things, so she can rest easy knowing she lived even part of the same life as everybody else, even while it pains him knowing that none of this is ever going to last, or at least it doesn't seem like it will. It's his willingness to form a relationship with her even while she faces death that inspires Kaori to acknowledge her for once, to call her her sister, an act that ends up going a long way once it's revealed that Shiori will survive. Because it meant that even in the face of everything happening, the kindness and resilience of someone who was a stranger just a moment ago gave Kaori the strength to move past her own pain, to make another person happy while they were still here, to have the strength to form bonds with her that she'll treasure. The theme of love versus loss is expanded upon more in the subsequent route following Makoto Sawatari, the story's resident tsundere and prankster. Yuichi meets her when coming home from school one day, where she inexplicably tries to fight with him for no reason other than remembering that at one point she didn't like him. But she also doesn't really remember anything else, being an amnesiac much like Yuichi. What ensues is nearly 2 weeks worth of back and forth banter and pranking between the two of them, Yuichi expectedly being much more of an ass than he needs to be, calling her names and teasing her for enjoying silly childish things, bullying her for her love of manga and being read to, and refusing to partake in her games. This continues on until he bumps into an underclassman named Amano Mishio and begins befriending her. Seemingly a shy and quiet girl, Yuichi brings up Makoto a few times in hopes that she'll want to befriend her, a request that Mishio vehemently denies, but not before letting on that she knows something about Makoto. Shortly after this, her health begins visibly failing. Things such as struggling to use utensils that he attributed to her making a fuss for attention grow into outright failures to function properly, to remember things, to act like a normal person, and so he tracks down Mishio to talk with her again and see if she knows anything that could help. It's here that she explains that Makoto isn't a human, but rather the spirit of a fox that Yuichi had become close with before he went away for 7 years, one that missed him dearly and would have given anything to be with him again. And so she did, wishing to meet him again as a human and paying with her memory for that wish, the only thing driving her forward being the vague notion that she was hurt by him for leaving her alone. Mishio knows this because she became close with one of these spirits too, one that she loved dearly, only to have to watch them wither away and lose their humanity in a short time, seeing their mind and ability to live as a person disappear until they just passed away, returning to their fox form. Carrying that grief with her, she refuses to see Makoto because, much like Kari shielding herself from Shiori's death, the pain and emptiness that would come with it is too much to bear again. And so, Yuichi, now knowing exactly what's going on, does his absolute best to comfort Makoto, playing along with everything she wants, even if it seemed at first to be some childish indulgence of someone desperate for attention. But all those small things, no matter how silly, mean a lot to her, and with her emotions and thoughts and body disappearing before his eyes, anything that brings happiness to her is worth indulging. Her route culminates in 2 big events. The first is Mishio accepting Yuichi's pleas for help. Realizing that refusing to confront Makoto is doing none of them any good, she comes over to be with her while she's in a state that's just barely holding on to the last vestiges of humanity, able to express happiness and sadness but unable to form a coherent sentence without struggling and tearing apart at the seams. Mishio gently, patiently, gets her to say her own name, knowing that it'll make her happy to acknowledge herself one last time. Shortly after this, Yuichi brings her to the hill that they first met on, the hill that's her home, holding her in his lap and comforting her in her final hours, ringing her favorite little bells to make her smile one last time, to keep her awake and avoid the final curtains until it can't be delayed any longer and she begins to slip away, until there isn't anything left. Nothing but those brief flickers in his mind of happy memories.
Makoto!
I can't help but think of Makoto's route as a metaphor for the pain that comes with slow and visible death, particularly neurodegenerative disorders. Shiori's route introduces the concept of knowing that death's doors await everyone, even those who may appear fine, but Makoto's story adds that one extra element to make it all the more poignant. That the people you love who are at that point in their life may soon begin to slip and lose their humanity, their memories, their body, as the only thing left in their minds are a handful of things that make them happy, and a handful of emotions they can hardly express. But this ending combined with Shiori's forms to ask more questions. How do we handle death? How do we handle people as they're slipping away from us? I mean, obviously we should try to do what people want where it's possible. Shiori is all there and can clearly express what she wants and desires out of her supposed last days, but what about someone like Makoto? Yuichi can't treat her like a person anymore because what makes her a person, her memories, her emotions, they're gone. And maybe in this context it's okay to treat her like a simple creature because she is technically just reverting back into her fox form. Maybe just gently caressing her and telling her everything is okay like she's an animal is the right thing to do before she passes. But it's not always so simple. And I don't know what the true right answer here is, and neither does canon. All we can do is make people facing death's knell happy, make them comfortable in what way brings them the most joy, and carry on the memories we made with them. No matter how few, no matter how soon or long ago they were, what matters are those happy, joyful memories. And the final route is exactly about that. It's about how memories make us who we are, about how they, painful and happy, allow us to move on and grow, how they affect our desire or lack thereof to deal with and cope with loss, and how they can stifle us. It's about Ayu Tsukimiya. She is a core character in every single route, appearing regularly like a ghost watching over Yuichi, or to provide some event critical to the story's progressing that you likely won't even realize is her responsibility until you've read her route. Her importance and appearance is foreshadowed in subtle ways throughout the game, both thematically and in various events, and it makes getting to her route last even more impactful with all that in mind. Yuichi initially meets Ayu when she's running away after having dine and dashed him a taiyaki stand, leading him to believe she's a childish thief, an impression not really helped by her vocal tics, her general behavior, and her lack of knowledge about the world around her. But as Yuichi spends more time with her, he begins to appreciate her company more even as these quirks become more apparent and as his memory comes back. Her regular hints about their past together and his assistance in her search for something important she lost leads Yuichi to begin recalling their history in his dreams, and over the course of these first few weeks in her route, these memories help Yuichi begin to form a picture of just what happened all those years ago and why he forgot all of it, or more accurately, chose to. The full story is this. Yuichi met Ayu shortly after her mother passed, when she was a young child, hopelessly depressed and hurt by someone so close to her dying. Over the course of his week in town, Ayu started opening up and recovering, forming beloved memories with him of climbing trees and watching the town from afar, spending money on silly games and trinkets, and being given an angel doll that can supposedly grant free wishes, as long as he could make them come true. Her first was to never be forgotten, no matter how vague the memory of her was, so that no matter how long he would be away, he would always remember her as at least something. Her second was to go to school with him, so he made their favorite spot in the forest a pretend school with no rules and no homework, a private place for just the two of them to enjoy each other's company and teach each other about silly little things. This all came to an abrupt end as Yuichi was getting ready to leave for the year. Coming back from school with a gift for her, Ayu sitting on top of the tree that she would always climb, a strong breeze of stray wind threw her off, and she fell, hitting her head in the process. Collapsed and dying in Yuichi's arms, he promises her that they'll play again one day as her consciousness fades, and all that's left is her lifeless body and the snow they laid in, colored red by the sun. The Ayu that had been guiding Yuichi along and playing with him these last few weeks was her child's spirit detached from her body, and the thing that she was searching for was that magical doll, still imbued with the power of one last wish. Yuichi, alongside his friends from class and Nayuki, make one big effort to find it themselves where he remembers it being buried, and they do. With the doll in hand found tattered and broken and shortly after fixed by Nayuki, Yuichi meets with Ayu one last time so she can make her final wish. She wants him to forget the pain and the suffering that's been caused by her, the spirit of her that's been seeing him that shouldn't have been able to exist. And so he does, holding her close as the apparition vanishes, and with it, his memories of her from this winter. A few days go by, Yuichi still recovering from everything he learned about his past, and Akiko brings him news from the TV. The girl that fell off a tree all those years ago didn't actually die, but instead fell into a long coma, and after 7 years, she finally woke from her dream. It is a fantastic route with a beautiful twist that I can't even begin to do justice to in words. The way it's subtly foreshadowed and built into her character, the use of red as symbolism for her catatonic near-death state, and her angel wings for her guiding presence with Yuichi, combined with the other two routes previously discussed, I think there's at least one clear message to take away. No matter how short it is, life is worth cherishing and joy is worth fostering. Even if it is painful and crushing at times, we shouldn't deny happiness to people suffering, people who are coming onto their last breath. And we can't just ignore the pain that comes to us from it either, because it becomes a part of us that changes how we see others and the world around us. But unlike Canon's world, we in real life don't have any miracles to hold on to save us. Coming back to that line that Shiori had said earlier about wishes, that combined with another idea she posits before that people want to be able to look forward to a happy ending to their stories, to distract from our often painful realities, one can't help but really accept that Canon's world is fiction, through and through. It's exactly what she says it is, a fictional world in which, to some extent, wishes and miracles can happen that allow our tragedies to be avoided. And I think that makes what's being said here even stronger. Canon wants us to accept that miracles aren't real, that sometimes things are going to end and that these happy endings are reserved for fiction, but we don't need fiction to be real to be happy. It's why I use Root Work so brilliantly to compliment Shiori Makoto's, because it's about what happens when we try to deny these painful realities, what happens when we try to forget our pasts only to realize the hurt and the emotions won't leave if we reject them. We have to accept our memories to move on from them. We have to accept that part of life, and that it doesn't make the joy we gain from and give to other people meaningless, no matter how short-lived. Because if we can't accept these memories and these emotions of these experiences, if we can't accept that there are no miracles coming to save us, then we're just dreaming and living in fiction. As much as I love these three roots, however, and how they work together to form one impactful story, that's still only 3 out of 5, and there's a reason I've neglected the middle and the beginning of the game. Mai and Nayuki's roots are the two biggest problems in here. Mai's route sounds interesting on paper. If Yuichi chooses to go to school late one night to bring a book he borrowed from Nayuki back to her, then upon trying to leave, a mysterious person appears, wielding a sword and threatening him. After a moment, he's able to defuse the situation and get a brief message from this mysterious girl, that she uses this sword to fight demons that invade the school at night and that he needs to leave. So he does, and while at school the next day, Yuichi meets her close friend Sayuri Kurata, who, besides being the best girl and also literally me, helps him to understand and get to know Mai during the day, while Yuichi follows her in on her nightly expeditions, bringing her food, giving her company despite her apprehension to say much to him, and despite the danger apparent in each situation. This eventually ends up with Sayuri suspecting something is happening and going to the school at night to surprise Mai before being promptly attacked and severely injured, causing Mai to lash out with Yuichi soon needing to restrain her. It's not long after that the two go back to school to hunt demons one last time. Defeating seemingly all of them, Yuichi tends to the wounds Mai got from the battle and goes to get her food, only to find she's run off. On the way to catching up with her, he encounters one last surprise demon, one that triggers memories of their past many, many years ago, of a girl with incredible healing powers shunned by society, telling a lie about demons coming to destroy the field they loved playing on just to get him to come around. Because he was her only friend, the only person willing to see past how different she was, and she just wanted to be around him. But he never came back to that field, and so she kept believing in that lie, hoping that one day he might come back to her, until the powers she rejected manifested those demons into reality, projections of her own pain and loneliness that she can't run away from. Yuichi realizes this and confronts her, bringing her the same type of rabbit ears she used to wear ages ago when she was a happy child, just to show it's time to move on. Realizing and accepting that she doesn't have to keep a shell around herself, that she doesn't need to hide her emotions and who she really is anymore, that she doesn't have to fight and stay strong anymore. She stabs herself, accepting her powers and allowing them to heal her. On its surface, it should be my favorite route for its themes of seeing the best in other people and for its willingness to talk about self-acceptance, the way we internalize self-hate, grief, and loneliness, and lash out at others and what's around us. The use of demons to represent her own internal problems is pretty on the nose, but I still think the game's message of learning to accept oneself for who they are is a good and well-executed one where it shows up. But this route is horrendously padded for its main portion, with numerous slice-of-life scenes during the day that do nothing to advance the story or build character, and action scenes at night with no genuine threat. I don't think it ever becomes tedious or unenjoyable to read, but it can be hard to follow what's actually supposed to be going on, made even worse by the fact that pretty much all of the backstory is crammed into the end of the route, in the form of a 40-minute long series of flashbacks and a 20-minute long side route about Sayuri's history. The worst part is, I think those parts are really good content. Mai's backstory is interesting and tragic, a girl with incredible powers to heal others traumatized by being forced into stardom, so people can cheer and jeer of the same powers that saved her mother from dying. The result of this was a girl kind beyond compare who doesn't want to talk or associate with people out of fear of judgment, and Sayuri was one of the few people willing to see beyond this. This is despite the fact that she herself is a damaged person, born to a rich and powerful family who left her to raise their son harshly, living with self-hate from never being allowed to let him be a happy, normal child. Yet she still finds it in herself to take care of other people, to try and make them happy and see the good in them. What's interesting is how these two came to very different conclusions about how to live and cope with their pain. Mai appears to keep people at a distance while being quiet and uncaring, but in reality holds people she cares about close to her and pretty earnestly shows her feelings in subtle ways, afraid of destructive outbursts if she lets them take hold of her. And Sayuri seems outgoing and cheerful, but refuses to let herself become too attached to others, particularly men, and lies about her feelings to hide her own self-hate. Mai and Sayuri are both broken people. They're damaged and filled with self-hate, but they both clearly care about each other and could help each other to grow. Relationships like that aren't unrealistic, nor are they particularly uncommon for queer people, but this relationship being so strong makes Yuichi's presence in it feel, well, forced to me. Their similarities and striking differences make for a dynamic that would be fascinating to explore, one that I, and I'm sure a lot of other people could relate to, and I know I'm not pulling from nothing here because the game straight up has lines of Yuichi fantasizing about them in the bedroom together, and in the 2006 adaptation, Mai says that she loves Sayuri. And that's without the uncharacteristically strong emotional outbursts that happen when Sayuri gets hurt, and the fact they go on to study abroad together in the Kazuhana OVA for the original Toei animation, and like, wow, do they lay it on thick here?
ごめん。いいんだよ。決めたでしょ。留学中は2人で助け合っていこうって。
I'm definitely not the only person who thought there was something romantic and intriguing about their relationship. But that all gets washed away here because they aren't allowed to have that. Because Yuichi is the male protagonist and the self-insert, and there has to be a reason for him to exist in their story beyond just being a friend, since, let's face it, the average player isn't going through this game to read a story about two gay women learning to be better people and find their love for each other with the assistance of a friend. There has to be some sort of straight relationship here to fantasize about. To be completely clear, I don't think it's fair to hold this against canon as a product. It's a Bishoujo game, a title primarily marketed towards men in a genre with countless games that don't really have themes or meanings or anything beyond just date women. This is a very particular musing coming from someone who's been through a lot and has the possibility of that relationship hit a certain spot, but I also get that's not what this game is. And for as much as I see in their relationship and wish it would have blossomed in that way, I don't know if canon would have been as successful had it not simultaneously been one of the purest and most modern examples of a Bishoujo game to that point in time. Pure in the sense that the story is driven entirely by dating and getting closer to a series of women, and modern in the sense that it's a straight-up visual novel akin to what we're used to now from the genre, with none of the mechanics of a traditional dating sim to hold it back. I don't know if Key could have been so bold as to make full routes dedicated to characters you can't date, and if they were, I can imagine it taking appeal away from their target audience. An audience that they were probably fighting to maintain after one success with how crowded of a genre Bishoujo games were becoming. But I can't help but see it as disappointing in retrospect. Their relationship is so strong and interesting, and Yuichi just doesn't have that chemistry. At no point did I think that him and Mai had anything that made them a couple. It just sort of ends up being a thing even where it didn't need to be. This necessity to be able to date affects Nayuki's route too because, and here's a big twist that I've been keeping hidden in this video, she's Yuichi's cousin. Well, it's not that abnormal for an eroge, I guess, but it's still weird to me how much they focus in on it. But still, the core of her story is this. How long is too long to wait for love? How many years can someone wait before it's no longer worth waiting on love to be reciprocated? And while I think that's an interesting theme to explore, it doesn't really add anything to her character other than weirdly into her cousin as a character trait. And thematically, it doesn't really tie into anything else. Shiori's route is about how we handle the lead up to death, Makoto's is about how we handle people falling apart in front of us, Mai's is about how grief can consume and hinder us, and Ayu's is about letting go of grief while still keeping our memories and pushing on. So where does this vanilla theme about unreciprocated love fit in? The answer, at least for me, is nowhere. This doesn't make Nayuki's route unenjoyable, looking past the whole cousins thing, as one sometimes has to when reading old eroges meant to sell to otakus. It's a perfectly fine romance with a few cute moments. It just doesn't add anything to the story in my mind, and it's a clear example of genre conventions and expectations hurting the game in retrospect. I suppose to be entirely fair, they do actually try to fit her route in with the overarching themes towards the end, with Akiko being suddenly involved in a car accident and Nayuki retreating into her own shell to cope with it. But when I say that it's sudden, I mean it has absolutely no foreshadowing whatsoever. She just goes out for groceries and the next dialogue box is like, oh yeah, she got murked, sorry. It's probably about now that people who are only familiar with canon through the KyoAni adaptation are probably very, very confused what I'm talking about, which is exactly why I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about the KyoAni adaptation of canon. But first, a thanks to my patrons. I didn't really know how to segue into this, but needed to put it in somewhere, so here we go. I can't thank everyone who's been donating to this channel enough. I don't exactly make a lot of money being a freelance musician, kind of the only job besides these videos that I can hold up due to factors of my background out of my control, so even the small amount I make means the world to me. It means I can get groceries, medications, pay rent, whatever I need to live with just a tiny bit less stress over my head, and I seriously could not be more thankful for it. Y'all are the best. Also, I'm gonna sneak this in here, this segment is not a full look at Canon 06 as a whole. I'm already close to running late on this video, so if you want more on the show, then you should go and watch Lisan and Manpig's video on the show. They did a really good retrospective of many of Key's works, so go check those out if you want more Canon, and more Key in general. That said, let's talk about anime. Released in fall 2006, Kyoto Animation's Canon was the second attempt at adapting the classic visual novel into an anime, the first being courtesy of Toei back in 2002. I will admit to not having watched that for this video, with the exception of Kazahana as previously mentioned, since I've already lost track of how long it took to create this video without looking into it, and frankly, I think my brain is going to give out as soon as I hit that export button in Final Cut. So while I cannot speak to the quality of that, outside of Yuichi's hilarious fucking face, what I can say is that Canon 06 is quite possibly one of the best adaptations of a visual novel into an anime that I've seen, up there with Ufotable's Fate Stay Night works, the most recent of which being one of the only times in recent memory that I can remember being utterly wowed by a film when leaving the theater. First off, I have to get this out of the way. The animation here is gorgeous. There are so many shots that I'm going to be thinking about for a long time, so many incredible sequences, and even outside of that, the expressiveness of the characters truly brings them to life. Makoto's goofiness, Nayuki's cute sleepy swaying, Mai's stilted demeanor, Shiori's gentle movements, Ayu's franticness as she's teased, it's all portrayed far better visually than orthographically with Canon's run-of-the-mill VN protag dude style of prose. It also really hammers home the wintry feel that was already present in the VN. Overwhelming snowy whites, strong but soft blooms, and the colors. God, this show uses colors to absolutely nail the homey and sometimes somber tone, especially with the gentle orange sunsets. This is the perfect series to watch on a quiet, snowy evening. The artwork as a whole is also noticeably better than what we got before. Hinoue Itaru's work in the VN is doubtlessly good. There's some fantastic CGs, and I personally love the cute look of the character sprites, much as some people don't, but everything here is just so much more refined and less amateur while still retaining the charm of her original illustrations. Where this adaptation really succeeds, though, is in its structure. Rather than being as close to a direct translation of one or all roots as possible, the story here was majorly changed so that it can hit every important story and character beat without ever needing to push romance in as a character motivation. You do still have individual arcs focusing on each of the main heroines, but they feel exactly like that. arcs with a focus rather than completely segregated stories honing in on one particular thing. What impresses me is just how cleanly this was pulled off. Fluff and filler from each route is cut to a minimum, the show seamlessly transitions between beats from multiple different routes that occurred at radically different times in the VN, every character was given more of a starring role, even in arcs not equatable to their route, and many additional scenes were added to bridge gaps and flesh out the cast, as well as show characters and events only hinted towards originally. There's one particular side effect of merging everything together into a cohesive story though, and that's growth. Because of the inherently closed-off nature of multi-route VNs, while what happens matters in a meta-narrative sense, the reader being able to paint more of a picture of the world, the characters, and the themes as they progress through the story, what happens to everyone doesn't really matter from route to route. When you finish Shiori's route and start Makoto's, everything that Yuichi had learned as a person is reset to nothing. This is particularly frustrating for Kanon as, like mentioned before, Yuichi is goddamn unbearable at times early on, so resetting to 0 can be, well, tiring. But in a story like the KyoAni adaptation with a straight beginning to end plot, that isn't really something that can happen. What he learns from one arc carries over to the next. It changes him as a person and how he sees the world and the people around him, and by the end of everything, he is nothing like how he was in the beginning. Everyone in this story has to grow, and that's something that adaptation screenwriter Fumihiko Shimo focused in on to incredible effect. While I grew to love the cast of the original VN, watching this show made me appreciate everyone even more. The main heroines, the side characters, yes, even Yuichi. He starts off in a much more likable place from the get-go, more of just a smug but kind guy who goes a bit too far on the odd occasion, and by the end, he ends up a genuinely lovable person, one who the writers recognized needed the change from what was in 2006 and even now, a pretty typical VN protagonist leaning on the side of just straight up being an asshole, into something more. Yuichi isn't the only one who saw changes though. Everyone is at least slightly different just because, with exception to Ayu, romance isn't an end goal or even much of a factor for them. Nayuki's love is played as something from her past that isn't a factor now. Shiori views Yuichi more as a brother than a potential boyfriend. Makoto's affection and desire for marriage is treated appropriately platonically, and Mai just misses her once only friend, not a boy she had a crush on. How she's treated really stood out to me, as if it wasn't already obvious by how much I went on about her and Sayuri, I think her romance with Yuichi really had a negative effect on the whole story. It reduced her backstory to just a reason for her to want Yuichi, it made any romantic implications she had with Sayuri nil, and all we got for it was a nothing romance between two characters with no chemistry. Now, they're just good friends, and it's all the better for it because it lets her have that depth that she was robbed of before. I feel it's much easier to appreciate her as a character here too, just because of the reduced padding and better overall moments. Each slice of life and action scene is packed with so much content, be it visually and clever writing or both, that they all stand out from one another and stay entertaining, a stark contrast from the way they all blend in with each other in the VN. Those changes took Mai's arc from something I thought was just alright in the original, to easily one of my favorite pieces of canon as a piece of media. Another thing that's worth bringing up that spawned from the lack of romance is that the Edo scenes have all been gutted out, which stand as one of the biggest issues of the original release of the VN, since they're, well, pretty atrocious, both horribly written and in some cases gross given full story context, though I don't exactly hold it against Key, as I think they're a case of being thoughtlessly shoved in to move more units, much like the R18 version of Fate Stay Night. And frankly, if you've used the internet at all and been around weeb circles, you know how terribly those went. This feels especially true of how they're not only optional in the R18 releases, but removed so stealthily in the All Ages version released 5 months later on PC and just over a year later on Dreamcast, that I really doubt they were ever meant to be there. If I have to point out any issues of the show that particularly stand out to me, there's two that come to mind. The first is that the pacing is a bit spotty in some places. While it's mostly fantastic, there's 1 or 2 times where I found myself surprised by how fast things were progressing along, with Makoto's route being the standout example. There's some good hints towards her regressing before it happens, but it still feels incredibly sudden when it hits. I really feel this show would have benefited from being 26 episodes instead of 24, if not just to give Makoto a bit more time, and also to give more backstory to Shiori and Kaori's relationship. The other is the music, which, Well, as much as I love the songwriting in the original VN, the quality of the instruments is not on par with anything you'd hear now, and even for 1999, many of the songs had a very budget feel to them, courtesy of being composed on budget synthesizers. Like, I'm 99% sure that a Roland Sound Canvas SC88 Pro was used all over, and the Sound Canvas series as a whole was marketed towards musicians working on a budget from their desktop. And if you know what it sounds like I do, you can pick it out from a mile away. And while I absolutely love them, I mean, heck, the 88 Pro was the first synth I owned, and I still sneak it in the music where that mid-90s game music feel is wanted, they were distinctly budget in their day, and by 2006, they and their ilk were adorably antiquated, which makes it bizarre that these are just mixed in raw with original score and more up-to-date sounding covers with no regard for how they'd stand out. Those are minor problems in the grand scheme of things, though, because taken as a whole, I genuinely believe that KyoAni's take on Key's first story is superior to the original. It doesn't override the VN as a whole, it's still an impossibly important piece of history and an enjoyable read over a few long evenings, but the show is just, I guess, a more fulfilled work. I feel it accomplishes everything the VN set out to do, and then some, coming together as a great and unforgettable romance story with a clear vision and few flaws. Re-experiencing Kanon in the form of this anime and seeing it in a form with such clarity helped to remind me of why exactly I feel so passionate about it in the first place. Why I've spent so long writing and editing and putting together this dorky hour-long video about the meaning of a game that's sprinkled with problems throughout and might be more fascinating to people as a trinket of when the eroge genre and the VN medium as a whole was still breaking out of its erotically driven shell, a trend started with story-heavy titles like Yuno. Because despite its flaws, major and minor, it's a story that landed at the exact right time for it to get me through one of the hardest times in my life. Shortly after I moved out of my parents' place in 2021, and in the process of rebuilding my scattered life, I wanted to try and reach out to people in my family whom I barely knew. In particular, one of my grandfathers. I didn't really know him at all growing up, but I wanted to fix that and be the granddaughter he didn't have before. And when I did reach out, I'd never seen a man so prideful of my existence. Proud of where I am at my age, proud of me living on my own and paving my own path, and excited to see me this year, to go to places and hang out even in spite of his old age and various complications with medical problems. It made me happy to text and call him when I could, to hear he was holding out and to see him so happy that he could finally hear from me. When I started this script, I wrote that I couldn't stop thinking about the themes of this game, because they made me realize the people I love who are facing the tail end of their life aren't going to last forever. These are people that are important to me, that I've hardly gotten to know, that I know have limited time with before they start to fall apart and pass on, people that I'm doing my best to love and be close to, even though I know they're going to fall apart soon and all I'll have left is flickers in my mind, brief fireworks of joy in the form of memories, before I have to accept that reality is not going to let any of this last. In the middle of my feverish editing and rewriting of this script, I took time off to spend Christmas with people close to me, to enjoy a comfortable day free of work, and truth be told, I had a fantastic day. But after all of that, I wanted to call him and check on him because I thought it would make him happy, only to be told he was close to passing away. I knew none of this was going to last. I knew there was limited time left, but I didn't think it was this limited, and all I could do was cry and hope that some miracle could save him, but that's not realistic. Miracles aren't real. I wanted there to be something, but it was never going to happen. So I cried when he passed. I hurt and grieved and wished something was better. I wished there was something that could have turned everything around and made everything ultimately matter and not hurt anymore. I wondered if it was even worth it, if the pain I endured was worth it, if I would have been happier had I lived my life continually not to acknowledge his existence just like I was pushed to. But what happened did matter. Those phone calls and texts were real. Those fleeting times I saw him when I was younger were real. The times he told me he was proud of me and he loved me were real, even if some saving grace wasn't. Those few moments I had were worth the pain and the crying when I learned what happened, because even if I hurt, even if I still hurt, we made each other happy. And those memories, painful and joyful, are part of what define me now. My resolve and my desire to do good for people and make them happy, my want to reach out to people I've hardly known and do what I can to make them feel connected to others, especially in times like this, it only became stronger because of what I went through. Suffering is not a requirement to build character. Suffering is not something we all have to go through to prove we are worthy of existing and that we are worth something as people, but as the world is now, it is almost inevitable, and when it does happen, we can't forget it because it becomes part of us and part of how we see everything around us. I don't know if I would have come to that conclusion had this story not landed at the exact time that it did. I might still be horribly distraught, confused by the cruelty of the world, and my faith and hopes crushed by the fact that nothing came to save one of the few people in my family I felt truly attached to. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about Kanon, even the visual novel. It is a flawed piece of media for sure. Its messages aren't conveyed well in every route, it struggles with leftovers of an earlier era of eroge, its protagonist can be downright unlikable, and it is clearly dated in its art and sound design as much as I love them. But what is here, that message in particular, is one that rings loud and clear to this day, perhaps even more so in these last few years where death and loss seem as daily an occurrence as the sun rising and setting. Life may not last forever, but while it does, we have to do everything we can to enjoy it for what it gives us. Finding joy in what mundanities we can, indulging ourselves in what makes others happy and what makes us happy, because we aren't always going to have those things. We can't live in an illusion that everything is just going to last forever. We aren't always going to have the people and the things we love, and we'll regret those moments where we were so crass to people simply because we didn't take the time to understand the joy of what they wanted us to enjoy, even when it took nothing from us to do. At the same time, we have to know when to let go of our past. We have to know when to leave the pain behind and move on stronger from our memories, lest we let them overtake us now and forever. But we can't forget them. We may need to let go of that pain, but we can't forget the lessons we were taught and the happiness we were given. We can't keep reliving the same memories forever, nor can we abandon them. We have to move past the pain and cherish the lessons and the joy, because this isn't going to last forever. And that's okay. Who threw fireworks into my room? You!